and then get off this rock before the storm finishes you off.
So, it's been a few months since we looked at the cycle, and I thought we might check in, as I'm hoping this title builds into something really quite promising. As a quick catch-up, although this looks like a BR, it's more like the Division's Dark Zone in setup. You're fighting AI in the form of random mobs, completing contracts for factions to earn reputation, looting materials for crafting, and fighting other players for supremacy. So after not playing for a while, I'm both happy at progress in some areas and slightly worried in others. But first, the game is in open beta now, so if you fancy trying it for yourself, I'll of course link it in the description below. On the larger scale of design sort of things, the game's main problem, in my opinion, for people who've never heard of it before, perhaps you've seen some screenshots or watched a trailer, is that sort of lack of identity. I've watched a bunch of streams from big fish in those waters who instantly, of course, presumed that this is a Battle Royale, with the common phrase being something along the lines of, "How is this different to Apex?" The lack of a single, easy-to-understand sentence that describes the game hurts those crucial first impressions. Also, what's fighting against that is that so many elements of this sort of sell the game in that different direction. For example, the open-world landscapes, the squads, the dropping down from the sky, these are all modern shorthand descriptors for a game genre that the cycle isn't really a part of. Perhaps there are steps that could at least warn prospective players that their assumptions about the game type is wrong. Maybe having players spawning gates or tunnels around the map rather than dropping in would break some of that BR feel, but I already guessed that the lore of the game wouldn't be too comfortable with that. But drop a comment below if you can think any other changes that they could make to sort of break that Battle Royale feel. And just a quick interlude to say, please do tap the thumb button to show your general enjoyment for the video. It honestly really does help me out. Thank you. For a game that's sort of ostensibly about loot, there's something missing from that side of the game loop, I would feel. I'm not really sure when I'm picking things up as I'm playing, if I'm honest. I'm seeing the items on the ground with those little spikes that indicate points of interest, but the list that's presented to me at the end of completing a match of all the things I picked up almost always comes as a surprise. Oh, I got 3 of those. Okay. Oh, I got 2 of those. Okay, I don't really remember seeing that before ever. It leads to a sort of disconnect to that whole side of the game. The resources are used for crafting, but every time I see that list, it's almost like a random collection of things that I don't feel like I have much control over. Yet when I read the descriptions of those resources outside of a match, I do see that they give indications to where they should be spawning. I complained last time about there not being enough to do as a 4-person squad. I'm sure that this looting is exactly the sort of activity that should be filling that gap over directly completing the main contracts. But with the lack of communication in-game being what it is, it's that constant maintenance of checking that the squad is at least sort of keeping together, that you're not being left behind. It seems to occupy all that sort of downtime, not in a particularly enjoyable way. To that end, the solos and duos mode they've introduced recently certainly frees up that chore somewhat. Although it's worth pointing out that as far as I know, the monsters themselves don't drop loot, only credits to spend in that match, which sort of feels a bit odd to me. And just to drive home that point more about in-game communication, it almost feels like I'm at the point where I can't really assess how the final game will feel without those systems in place. We've all had the experience of playing CS or Apex when no one has a mic. It's frustrating and it can feel like you're relying on RNG for your success. All in all, text and voice comms cannot come soon enough to the cycle. One of the main complaints I had from the previous initial video was the quality of the sound design of the game. It was something that was popular to comment on as well. After more time with the game, I can say that that initial impression of its state was perhaps swayed by the situation. Although, as far as I know, nothing has actually changed in the game assets as of now. And sort of let me explain what I mean by that. During the tutorial, you're introduced to the PDW SMG weapon, the sort of mid-tier thing above your pistol. Once you have some credits, you can buy a new weapon, and that tends to be the gun that you get. As most people were new players back then, most people didn't have other weapons unlocked for that first initial tier. So everyone used the same PDW weapon, and hence the same noise seems to be almost all I heard in gunfights back then. The new sandbox area that they added allows you to hear the audio from the other weapons as well, and it's much more varied than in that original alpha video. Though in saying that, other titles such as COD or Battlefield managed to place their weapons in the environment better with sound, perhaps using reverb or other effects to sort of color that sound to sell it as actually taking place in that world. I'm sure there are layers of complexity to sound design to sort of describe that better. I'm not an expert. But on the whole, even though things feel more varied now, it still remains a weak point for the experience. The audio still undersells the action that's happening on screen, and almost all the weapons need significant work, I would say. They have teased and even slightly playtested a second map for the game too. Fortunately, I wasn't available for that first test. I am on the lookout though, as I like that the game is looking forward to vary the repeat experience of playing. I'm sure you've experienced map fatigue with other games. Yes, and I do tend to mean BRs, but landing in the same areas to have the same fights while looking at the same visuals can make the game feel old even before the actual gameplay does, so I like that the devs are already looking forward to break that repetitive cycle. On the flip side of that is something that does indeed make every game of the cycle feel sort of samey, and that's the location of the evacuation ship. The ship is in exactly the same place every round. You know the fights you're going to need to have with the same spawning NPCs each time. It desperately needs an alternate landing location to mix it up. And what makes that even more surprising is that the tutorial doesn't use that same landing location to actually explain the mechanic to you. So I'm guessing that it's not tied to that specific location. There's probably other reasons, but I'd like to see those solved as soon as possible, as it too is hurting the experience. Performance seems better too, something that was originally a concern. However, the storm visual effect that happens towards the end of the match still badly hurts my FPS. I seem to lose something like 30 to 40% of my performance, which often has it drop below the bar to refresh and obviously makes the whole game feel really quite chuggy. The movement is faster, but the side strafe could be more responsive and a bit faster, I would say. The straight run speed doesn't need to be increased though. That feeling of lethargy, especially when using the movement skills, is just gone from the game now. Also, to augment this is the recent inclusion of vehicles to the cycle. They're not in a brilliant state, there's some genuine alpha feel to them, and I'm sure there will be more tweaks. But I like the idea of giving players the option to put their money into more mobility if they don't just want to scale their power through weapons. If you're playing the match for specific loot and know the area of the map that you want to visit, and having the means to go there quickly and sacrifice some of your firepower is a sort of interesting choice. There's other stuff I'd like to see improved too. Stuff like the direction of hit feedback seems a bit weak. There's too many times when I'm not sure myself, or when I see my teammates take too long to identify that they're actually being engaged in PvP. The audio cue for this should be much more immediate too. At the moment, it's like a voice explaining the situation to you in a sort of protracted way, and there's quite a lot of that chatter anyway. And what it actually needs is a sort of unique klaxon-like noise to alert you that this is a real threat from another player. Oh, and also the field of view still isn't wide enough. It's not Destiny too bad, but it's very console-y feeling and on the edge of being motion discomfort for me at times. These may all seem like negative points, but they are made from a position of someone who wants the game to do well. I'm trying to be constructive rather than simply pointing at areas and saying, this made me feel bad. I do think that this game is offering something a bit different and certainly deserves its day in the sun. There are definite improvements since the last time we took a look at the cycle, but there are still some original complaints that exist. However, this is a genuine alpha and not a glorified demo. They add new features to see how people feel about them, and then remove them if they are seemingly universally disliked, something that I would say happened with the recent experiment with weapon drops. So although it's nice to have a window into their development, it also shows that they don't view the game as out, even though it's effectively an open alpha. As we all know, with early alpha, the line when a game actually releases is not always that clear. Often it's more visible in retrospect rather than the actual time when you look back and then realize that the game has effectively been out for a while. Well, the cycle has introduced some Founders Packs that are an option to buy ahead of time, but there's no specific way to buy what looks like is going to be their premium currency outside of those packs. They also wiped player progression fairly recently too, so the game does genuinely feel like it's something in pre-release mode. So as such, it seems like some of the rougher edges can be a bit excused. There is genuine and active development taking place in an almost weekly pace. So is it worth playing? I still think it's worth your time to download and take a look at the game for yourself during this open alpha, give them some feedback about how you found it was to play. Just realize that this is an alpha, that things could change or break or be wiped, or perhaps all three at the same time. What do you think of the cycle though? Have you tried it already? Will you give it a go? Let me know your thoughts and feelings on this new title by leaving a comment below right now. I'll of course be reading every single one of them. Thanks as always for watching the video and for your continued support. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.